Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Criterion Learning Series. I want to first check and see if my audio is okay. I've had some issues with my audio, and I want to make sure that everything is fine. How is it now?
That sounds okay.
Much better.
Excellent. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to go into the settings here to
Steve,
configure all this stuff.
you may want to start again because I'm not sure. It's as soon as you started the presentation, it went odd. So I don't think anyone really heard the first part.
All right, no problem. So as I mentioned with expense reports, the employees are going to be submitting them and doing the work here in self-service. You'll notice here it's under pay, and I'll show you that after we go through the setup here on the admin side. So of course, what you would do is go over to administration by going to HR, payroll, whatever. It doesn't matter which one you go to because we're going into our settings first. So I have a tab open up here. And it's actually set up in a few different places. We don't have a specific section just for expense reports. You configure them in a few places, and then they all kind of come together for what you see in self-service. So let's start with the code tables where you're going to set up some system labels if they're not already configured. Now, they should be, but sometimes people delete codes or want to change the names of codes. And that's okay. What we need to do is make sure that the code itself is expense to indicate that it is an expense income code you're going to use. The description, you can call whatever you like. So if you want to call this expense reports or income for expenses, that's fine, as long as the code is expense. And then there's a second one that we added fairly recently called distance. And this will be used if you want to use a map for mileage. If people are putting mileage on an expense report, you need to have this one, code of distance. Description, again, you can call it whatever you like, as long as the code is distance. So these are set up here under user code tables and label. All right, now the other thing that you may need to set up, I'm not going to go into depth on this, is a workflow for approvals. So if you come over here, you'll want to set up probably, I'm assuming, an employee expense report workflow. So you'll see a workflow type called employee expense report. The name, I just use the same name there. You could call it different things, perhaps for different departments. The module, of course, is going to be in self-service because that's where the employees will submit it. And then the group or groups that it applies to, mine is very simple. It's all active employees. And then you'll set up your approval steps down here. So initiator is going to be the employee, and then perhaps their manager, maybe accounting is involved somewhere, something like that. You can set up one or more steps. If you require signatures, you could put some text in here and say, I agree that my expenses are true and accurate, or something like that. And then you can require a signature. Right, so that's if you want to do that right there. You'll of course have the other options, but that's how you'll need to set one up there. All right, so after you have those two kind of basics set up, you will want to go and set up incomes that you're going to use on your expense reports. So they will be set up here. I'll click on one just to show you airfare as an example. The code, again, you can use whatever you like. Perhaps you use numbers or abbreviations, that's fine. The description is what people are going to see on the expense report, so it should make sense as far as what this is. The compensation type, typically it's going to be cash. You're going to get cash for this. The type is going to be reimbursement. I'm assuming most people are going to actually not get taxed on this, so it would be reimbursement. That'll make it so it does not get taxed. The key is this system label expense that I've just talked about needs to be here. So the code expense needs to be here for us to know to use it on an expense report. All right. You may have limits in there and things like that. So you could set those if you like to. I don't have any set, but you might have those. And then of course the calculation method needs to be an amount. All right, so let's look at one where there is mileage, or maybe you do distance or something like that. So that one might be a little different. So you'll see here, of course, the code and description, cash and reimbursement. Now this you could do as units. So this one, they might type in, let's say 100 miles or 50 kilometers or something like that. So you could use a unit there rather than having the employee calculate how much it should be. They could type it in, and then it will use the rate for calculating the amount there. So let's just say the rate is 65 cents per mile. I don't actually know what it is this year. I haven't looked it up, but you can put in your rate here if you like. Then the system will calculate it based on the number of units. Let's say I put in 100 miles, it would say $65. All right. You'll notice your expense is there, but I also added this one distance. That'll enable us to have the system calculate the distance based off of addresses. So you can set that up right there. All right, and of course, set up any other ones you need. You might notice I got lodging in here. I've got parking. You may have other ones. Whatever you've got in there, you can certainly put in whatever codes you like in there. You'll want to probably set up your general ledger account mapping in there. So you would have to set up your general ledger accounts and then a mapping out to wherever it goes. I'm not going to cover that in this, but GL accounts, put in whatever it is for expenses. And then wherever those particular expense codes go, you'll notice mine's not really very configured at all, but you would set that information up. And then finally is your timesheet layout. So you can have different expense report layouts for different employees. So they're going to be based off of the timesheet layout. I'm going to click into this one, which is the one I'm showing if I go to my self-service. So there are a few different settings in here. You won't really notice anything here. However, if you go to the enhanced settings, the gear, you will notice here the expense report purpose, and I'll show you that in a second. But let's say you don't do vacation pay requests as an expense report, you can just remove that. All right, so you can remove that there. You have to have at least one. You can add other ones of these in the code table if you need to, but here's where you choose that purpose that people will show up when they do their expense reports. All right, so I'm going to turn them both on just so you see what that looks like there. And then finally, if you go to the field configuration, you can choose which fields are going to show on your expense report. So in my timesheet, I have project. If I want to also include that in the expense report, I can check that box. And then let's say I do task, again, I can do task. So you can have these 4 right there, as well as 4 custom fields if you would like. Let's say you needed some notes or something like that. You might configure a custom field to be of a text type and call it notes or something like that, and then show that on the expense report. So that's an option if you want to do that. All right, so you can see how that's configured there. If you don't check those, they will not show up there in there. And it will, of course, use these labels. So let's say I call project job and the task is activity or something. That's the labels that are going to show up on the expense report. All right, so I'll save those changes there. And that's kind of it for the setup of the expense reports. Let's look at how you actually would submit one as an employee and do that over here in self-service. All right, so I'm going to come over here, and as I mentioned, I got this pay menu right here that has expense reports right here. Okay, I have a couple I've already submitted. Let's just ignore those and create a new one. So I'll do add expense report here. You'll notice these 3 required fields at the top. I can't do anything at the bottom until I fill out the required fields up at the top here. So let's say I'm going to go to a conference or something like that. So I'll say conference in Orlando. Actually, I'm going to say in Washington. I'll see that in a minute here. All right, conference in Washington. The purpose, you may remember that drop down right here is the purpose. So you'll see those right there. All right, and then the date of the conference, of course, this might be several weeks ago. Sometimes people, they turn them in for, let's say, the month of May, even though the pay period might be this week. They might turn them in for a previous week or previous month, or even, further back if you want to do that. All right, let's just say I went last week. All right, so I'm going to do it on the 3rd there. And now once I have this stuff filled up at the top, I can add my expenses down here at the bottom. So you just add them one at a time. And let's just say this is a hotel. All right. Here you'll see those categories. Those were the income codes. So if I don't see one here that I am expecting, then you want to make sure, first off, that the code exists. And second, that the system label expense has been added to that code. That's why something might be missing there. All right. So I've got category lodging in my situation here. The date, let's just say it was the 2nd there. And then, of course, the amount. So let's just say the bill was $275.82. Okay. How did I pay for this? So cash advance would be, obviously I got some cash ahead of time, and I use that to pay for this. And of course, I might owe money back to the company. If I got $300 and I use 275, I'm gonna owe some back. Corporate card, you've got your corporate, Amex or MasterCard or whatever, and you use that to pay for it. So it's just recording it, and it can go to the general ledger, but the employee is not going to get that money back because it wasn't their money to start with. They were given that money, or they're using the card. Cash reimbursement is if they paid out of pocket. So do cash reimbursement there. And here you'll notice the project and task. Those are two things I enabled on my timesheet. So that's why they're here. And so I could choose the project and the task that's associated with it. I don't know if I have task associated with anything here. Doesn't look like I do. Let's see. I don't. So I can't do that now. If it was a requirement, I'd be in a little bit of trouble because I couldn't choose the task. But that's another story. So that's, I don't need to do that. Here you'll see notes here. Now this note is for this particular expense. It's not the same as that custom field that I mentioned, where you maybe want a custom field to track some information. So that is an option there if you want to. This note stays here, whereas if it's a custom field, it actually goes into the payroll batch detail. So you can actually have that there in the batch detail, and maybe you export it out for reports and stuff like that. Okay, so I'd hit save there. And you can see the entry here. Now I might need to attach, a copy of the receipt or the invoice here. So I would browse and find that and, upload that copy of that attachment or attachments. There's multiple to this particular entry there. If I made a mistake, of course, I can edit it by clicking in and making a change there. If I didn't mean to add this at all, I can trash can it to remove this line. All right, so I can add as many different things I need to put in here. Let's do mileage. Now this one is a little different because I have a quantity. And I also have this button to calculate the distance. So I'm just going to say mileage. All right, quantity right here. I could type in 100, and remember I did it at 65 cents. So 100 times 65 would be $65, 65 cents, right there. So you can do it that way. Or let's say I drove, I can put in here where I started and where I went to. So just type in, the address where you started. Okay, and where did you go to? And it will calculate that distance for you. 279 miles in this particular situation. This is, of course, the direct route. Now, what if they took the long way and they went all the way over here or something through Pittsburgh? That doesn't calculate that. They'd have to, put in something else. They'd have to use that actual quantity there if they did take the scenic route and went, down the coast or something. So this is the most direct route. That's how we have it calculated there. All right, so I'll just hit add mileage to my expense, and you'll see there's the 278.54. It did round up in this display here, the 279, but it put the actual right there. The employee might want to change that to say 279. But you'll notice there, of course, the amount, $181.32. All right, what was the date? Right there. I might want to say here, drove to the conference or something like that. And then you might have a return trip, a day or two later where we're driving back. So you can do that there, cash reimbursement, again, the project, and save that. All right, and then like I mentioned, maybe you do a return trip or something like that where you're going to do that. Maybe they need to put a receipt or, something like that. So very simple to be able to add these in here. Again, let's say there was a parking fee of $25. And I'll go ahead and save this. Now, this is not submitting it when I save, because maybe I need to come back. Maybe I didn't get the receipt. I left it in the car. I need to go get a picture of it or something. I can come back and edit this. Now, one thing is that we did add the ability for administrators to be able to see ones that have not been submitted. So if you come over here onto the admin side and you look up the employee that is in question here, they might say, hey, why didn't I get paid for my expenses? So we do allow this to be viewed over here where you can see hey, I didn't get my expenses. Well, guess what? You didn't submit it. That's why you didn't get it paid. So you are able to see that over here. You can't submit it, but you can see what they did and then tell them, hey, you got to go in self-service and submit that. So that is visible over here if you need to take a look at that right there. Of course, I can see the ones that are approved. And if there's ones that get rejected, again, I can see those there. So these are all here. You can add them here as an administrator. If you need to add an expense report for somebody, you could do that. The only thing is you can't submit it. So you can't do that through the admin. That has to happen through self-service. All right, so let's look at submitting this. I'll go back in here. I'm not going to make any changes here, and I'll go ahead and submit this here. You may remember that I did the signature was required. So Ted, signs this and, signs that there, or he has his saved signature and he submits that right there. But there we go. You can see that is submitted here. I'm going to go ahead and just override the approval and show you how we bring this into payroll. So of course, there's going to be, a notification letting me know that the expense report is submitted for approval. This, of course, you could configure this message to say whatever you like, and an email and text, if that's how you have it set up, will also go out to the employee who submitted it, but also to the approver. I think my approver was Chris, so I'd have to log in as him to see that. I believe I should be able to do that here. Maybe not. I don't remember what his password is. Let me just check. All right, I'm gonna try one other thing. Otherwise, I'll just log back in and override it. I don't remember what it is. So I'm gonna log back in as Ted and I will override that. But what happens is he would get a notification that it was, submitted and ready for approval there. So let me go into my settings and I'm gonna go down to the workflow or expense report. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'll just send this over back to Ted so you can see what he would look like. So I'm gonna just send it over to Ted. All right, so it was sent over there. And now when I do this, just so you can see what it looks like here, I have an expense report has been, it's basically submitted to me. So as the approver, this is what you would see. Employee expense report is the task. I can review it right in here. I can see what needs to be done on here. I can put down comments, if I needed to say something, hey, where's your, your lunch or whatever. So if you wanted to put down comments and reject it, you can do that. Of course, you can put down comments and accept it too. It's up to you. But I'll just go ahead and approve that right there. Of course, what happens is the employee is going to get a notification that their expense was approved. And if they go here, they're going to be able to see that it was approved and everything right there. And of course, in the workflow, you'll be able to track the approval and see all that information. Let me just refresh. Well, I'm sure you've seen that there where you can go back in and see the status, who approved it and stuff like that. All right, so it's ready to now pay in payroll. So let's go over there and just look at that real quick. Bringing this into payroll. I hope that I have payrolls configured to go this year. Let's just see here if I do. It looks like I should. All right, I'm going to do an on-cycle payroll here. And for my company, I think it's my weekly pay group, if I'm not mistaken. And there we go. Now, it does not need to be the same pay period as the date of the expense report. Let's just say I'm processing this one instead. Because sometimes the expense reports come in later because you're waiting for some emails or whatever. Maybe like I said, they do it once a month or something like that. So I'll just hit next year, and I hope Ted is included in this. Not worried about those. So here's Ted, and he doesn't have anything in there now, but I'm going to go ahead and do a load data of my expense reports. So this was another enhancement that we did in that right now, we don't put a period in here anymore. We used to put in the pay period. You'd have to come in and clear it out or change the date range to find the ones that have not been already brought in, which, could be a little bit of a pain in the neck because, like I said, sometimes they do it on like a monthly basis and it's not the current pay period. But now that I don't have this, I'm able to see all of the ones that have been created, and I can select one or more to bring into this payroll batch, even ones that are, as you can see, from like 3 years ago. So if I needed to pay those out, I can do that. If I want to see the detail on them, I can see those on here. All right. So that way I can make sure, of course, I can put in a date range. I can look for an employee. If I want to just find one employee, I can do that right there to bring that information in. All right. I'm just going to bring in this one that I just did. And if I have this configured right, which I hope I do, I should see it right there. There you go. So you can see there's the 275.82 for the hotel, or sorry, yeah, the lodging. And then there's the mileage, 65 cents. There's the actual number of miles and the 181.31 right there. And I should see parking, $25. All right, so you can see how that is in there. If I wanted to see the expense reports again, here's where I can bring in others. Now, this one does look by date range. So if I needed to go back to, a previous pay period or something like that, I would have to change the dates. So the one on the employee level does still have the date range, and you can just change that right there and then bring in other ones if you needed to do that. Okay, but you can see how that's brought that stuff in. Of course, stuff like you'll see here, the project and stuff like that is there. If those other ones had projects and tasks, I don't know if they did, I would see separate lines, unless they all happen to be the Sierra West. I would see separate line items for those items there. Right, now calculate. We'll see what happens here. You'll notice here, there are no taxes that came out here because this is all non-taxable. So you'll see that, I don't have any like salary or hours, so nothing calculated for taxes because everything is said is not taxable. These deductions came out because of how my configuration is, that they come out just off of all earnings. You don't need to do that. You could, in your formulas, have it not calculate on those if you needed to. Of course, you could override it. If you're just doing expenses, you probably don't want the company paid deductions or even the employee deductions to come out of those. But maybe there's other incomes that you're paying, like salaries or, regular pay, overtime, et cetera, and you would want those to come out. That's up to you. All right. So I would just go forward with my payroll at this point, approving it, processing it, and all the other things. I'm not going to go through those steps right now, but that is a quick overview of processing the expenses all the way through, from setup all the way into bringing it into payroll. So I don't know if we had any questions along the way. I think my audio held up because I didn't hear any other complaints. So we get a little bit of time back. I don't really like that saying, but we're ending early today compared to normal. Let me bring up that slide so I can talk about what is coming up in the near future for our coming webinars. I think it's going to show my whole screen here, but that's okay. Here you can see in a couple of weeks, we're going to cover performance reviews. We've covered this before, but again, there's one of those things where we've made several enhancements. We want to talk about those enhancements. So we're going to cover those here in a couple of weeks. Tied into performance reviews, even a little more tightly now, is compensation management. So we're going to cover that in July. So our first one in July, we're going to cover compensation management. Then we have a short week. I'm being a little selfish. I have the week off after that. So I moved that up, but also it's an exciting time because our new mobile app will be available, and it'll actually be available before that, but I want to show that off. So this one is going to be a little unique. That mobile 2.0 is just going to be on mobile. It's going to be showing my phone pretty much the entire time. So we're really excited to show that to you. And so that's coming up July 18th. And then we'll kind of go back to our regular schedule after that. And I don't have the calendar out there, but we'll have more, of course, throughout the summer. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Apologize for a little bit of the minor technical issues at the beginning, but I think we got through it all. Didn't see any questions, but if you do have any questions about this, need some help configuring, or you didn't catch it all during today's webinar, you can always reach out to us. You'll see our phone number there, and of course, email address. And in the system under administration, you can always hit the question mark to submit a ticket if you need to submit it directly through the software. If there is something that you'd like to see in expense reports, I do want to remind you that you can make customer feedback or feature requests as well. So whatever it is that maybe in expense reports you do something and you need that, we're certainly open to adding new features based off of your requests. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you all again in a couple of weeks. Thanks again.